nhớ rong ta nó cũng giờ chán đang mùa host trên đại mong lưu nhớ cho hú mong TV network trời mẹ lũ sai nhớ cho hú bê cho thua new Tuesday thật trong mong trời xa mong trọng tư một chán đang nhớ rong ta nó cũng giờ chán đang mùa ha mẹ sai mong lưu bê cũng dừng tao tại nếu nó mẹ cũng xí lũ sai bê lệ bê tao hay nếu cũng hát tu la ý cũng tao khá tụi mẹ là nó cũng nhớ cho tỷ lu conference center cũng nhớ cho hồ St. Paul cái River Center bây giờ dùng sát tại tòa mẹ cho cứ sai bên nhớ cho hồ mong TV tại nó cũng nhớ ít lúc sẽ cứ dùng thế ra cũng nhớ long cho lulu hay loang kỹ anh tàu tu cũng nhớ chỉ tàu là chỉ khát trong mẹ bao tại bây họ có mong celebrate plus cho xong nhớ cho St. Paul Minnesota cứ nhớ cho River Center thảo lu chi lì lu bản tin này có trao tìm mong sự cho lu chi lì bản tin bây giờ bé cô quan đào nhận đào trang yêu sự công trình cứ bé họ có mong cái sản xuất một dòng cái gì cho CMA cũng mua chi nó non đủ cho cô giờ ít tụ phong ye cứ giờ tụ tu đã Ted Adrian cứ khát trong một dòng cho chú kế cứ bé Mika ta Christian lu cho bé mong lương jeng tao thọ ít sinh cho bộ chỉ cho lưu trú cho ta chỉ nó bé mất sáng ta nó là chỉ cú giờ là dễ lên cho gì lúc xong là chỉ bé họ bảo mong cũng một lấy cho xong vì thế này rồi nào cú giờ ít tu CMA bé mong trả các luôn lái tàu cho linh sĩ cái giờ sáng chụp play là chỉ especially cho cái này dự cho lúc còn hồng cái lúc cho chúng mình dùng cho bé nếu nó bé sa celebrate bé cũng trông cái lệ nếu nó cũng mua lúc sai cái tuần dù cho David Adrian lúc sáng đó nói chuyện cũng có hai lô ăn kia cũng có dân du lịch thang em nhớ thì ban thì chế nó chỉ mấy cô dân nông ha nó lại khỏi cái cũng nông này thì cứ tết cho cô. At this time, I just want to welcome you, David. I know that this is Hmong Lu show, and obviously the word Hmong Lu is translated in the Hmong or in the English language as grace. And so the reason why this show is called Grace is because the Hmong people has received grace. And I think that the only time when they realize they receive grace is when they realize that Jesus Christ has ultimately become the Savior and the Lord, not just to who they are as a Hmong people, but finally they've heard of Jesus Christ for the existence of however long God has permitted the Hmong people to exist. And so your father was credited not just bringing the Hmong people in the country of Laos the gospel, but your father was pretty much used by God to contribute grace to us. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to just say welcome to the show. I know that I've already said your name was David Adrianoff already, but kind of just share to us a little brief about who are you and how many brothers or siblings you have, and your mom and your dad, and just the general sense of where you were born and when did you actually end up in Laos, where knowing the Hmong people, how did this come about? So.
Well, thank you.
Yes,
this is a privilege to share with you.
Yes.
I come from a family of 3 children. Yes. My parents, Ted and Ruth Andrianoff. Okay. I was the firstborn. Okay. And I was born while my father was pastoring a church in Newark, Ohio, which is outside of Columbus. Yeah. And 2 years later, my sister was born. Okay. 4 months, my sister Jeannie was born. 4 months later, the 4 of us got on a ship and sailed to a place called French Indochina. Yes, yes. We disembarked in Saigon, Vietnam. Okay, okay. And that was the start of my parents' missionary experience. Okay, okay. Maybe I'll go back a little bit.
Yes, yes.
And explain how my parents ended up in French Indochina.
Yes, 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 yes.
So my father is one of the children of Russian immigrants. Okay, okay. His father and mother and brother and sister came over on a ship from Russia and landed in New York. They gave up everything they owned to escape from the revolution in Russia and ended up in southern New Jersey. Okay. And that's where my father was born, in Philadelphia.
Okay. Okay.
And they were living in New Jersey. And after they were there for a while, my grandmother asked a neighbor,
Okay.
I want to raise my kids. She spoke very poor English.
Okay. Okay.
She said, I want to raise my children to be Americans. Okay. What's the best thing I can do?
Okay.
And the neighbor said, send your children to Sunday school.
Okay. Okay.
So she knew nothing about the church.
Right.
But a nearby church was a Christian Missionary Alliance church.
Okay.
And she sent her children to the Christian and Missionary Alliance.
Your grandma sending your dad?
My dad and his brothers and sisters.
Okay. And so your grandparents were first generation immigrated Russians.
Exactly.
So now your father is pretty much a second gen born Russian American.
Exactly.
And so the best thing to do as trying to be an American, of course, is to just go to church like normal Americans.
Well, go to Sunday school. Yes,
right.
yes,
Okay.
yes, exactly.
Okay.
That's right. And yes, my father was second generation.
Okay.
In the home, they spoke Russian.
Okay. Okay.
But in school, of course, he learned English.
All right.
So as a second generation immigrant, he grew up speaking two languages.
Sure.
He was fluent in Russian and fluent in English. And gradually, he became more fluent in English. He could understand all the Russian. And eventually, he could not speak as well because he was always... So, yeah, thank you for pointing that out. That's very relevant.
Very relevant to second generation Hmong Americans today.
Yes, that's a really good point. And so while my father was in high school, he gave his life to Jesus. And because he was going to a Christian and Missionary Alliance church, after he finished high school, they recommended that he go to NIAC. It was called Missionary Training Institute in Nyack, New York. And in the meantime, my mother I think she was the third generation Swedish. And her father was a lay minister. In other words, he had a job, but he was pastoring a very small Alliance church in Cleveland, Ohio.
So both parents came from an Alliance background.
Yes, they did. Which is why they both ended up at Nyack. My mother went there first, and after she was there a year, my father came.
Nice.
And so what happened, as I recall, my mother was sitting at dinner, and this man came, tall man, handsome man, came in, and he was kind of always late for everything. So he was late for dinner and had the last seat, which was right across from my mother. And that's when they first met. So anyhow, the story, so 3 years later, my father graduates from Nyack, and by then they were engaged, and they got married after that. While they were at Nyack, they had different continent prayer bands. They had a prayer band for Asia. They had a prayer band for Africa. My parents felt that God had called them to Africa. So they were in the prayer band for Africa. And then they contacted the Christian and Missionary Alliance to say, we submit ourselves to serving in Africa. And they say, you must serve church in the U.S. for 2 years. So the first church they served was in Newark, Ohio. And that's where I was born. And then after they'd been there for just over a year, they moved to Zanesville, Ohio. And while they were in Zanesville, Ohio, my sister was born. And then it was about that time that the Christian Mission Alliance came to them, and they said, would you be willing to serve in French Indochina? My father said, where's that? And so he checked it out, and he says, I will serve where God sends me. And if you, as the mission agency, want to send me to French Indochina, I am willing. I am willing to do whatever God wants. And so that's...
Now, French Indochina, of course, we don't have that anymore. And of course, this is 2018, but what year was this when there's a French Indochina, or what is French Indochina?
Okay, first, the year, it was right after World War II.
So it was very long ago.
Very long ago. It was 1947. And French Indochina at that time consisted of 5 different kind of countries. Different French protectorates.
Right, right.
There is Tonkin,
Okay.
Cochin, China,
Okay.
Annam,
Okay.
Cambodia,
Okay.
and Laos.
Okay.
The first three, Tonkin, Cochin, China, and
Right.
Annam, are now Vietnam.
Okay. Okay.
And
okay.
so
That's
they went there first to study French
okay.
in Vietnam for
Okay.
2 years.
Okay. Now, during that time, I would assume that French kind of took some sort of colonization to that area. So French was a
The
common
5
language.
countries were French
Okay,
colonies.
so they were all French.
They were
colonies.
all French colonies.
So there was French-speaking.
French, which is why
People there.
they had to
Okay.
learn French,
All right.
because all the government everything was run by
Right.
the French
Okay,
in
okay,
French. So just a little background, we haven't gotten there yet, but
Okay.
Cambodia and Laos, most of the administration were either French or Vietnamese.
Okay.
Because the Vietnamese spoke better French
Okay.
than these other.
Right, right,
so,
right. Okay, okay.
So that's how they got
Okay.
to French. It was called French Indochina
And this
because it
is-
was under the French.
Right, okay. So this is 1947.
Right.
Your mom and dad just, like I said, young family now, finally reestablishing or just beginning to start a family, but yet here's a call, and he's willing to go to, or at least plan to go to Africa until they had availability to French Indochina, and he takes up the call. So, okay, he takes up the call, so you guys decide to move, or was it did your dad just move with
Well,
your
I was
mom,
2 years
or-
old, so I didn't have any
Okay.
choice.
So basically, the children went along with
Yes, of
mom
course,
and dad.
yes.
And so you guys came to Saigon, and now what we called Ho Chi Minh City, correct? And so you settled there, and at least,
We arrived in Saigon, and then the mission had a compound
Okay.
just up north, up in the mountains, in a place called Dalat.
okay, okay,
And that's where they had the language school,
Okay.
and also children's school.
okay. And so that's pretty much where you grew up.
Well, we spent 2 years
Okay,
there.
you spent 2 years there.
And so during that time, the 2 years, they were assigned to French Indochina. They didn't know
What area?
what colony of French Indochina they would go. While they were there, the mission asked them if they would be willing to join the missionaries in Laos.
Okay, okay.
And
okay.
so my father said, I submit to the will of the mission.
Okay, okay.
And if you want me,
Right, right.
we'll go to Laos.
Right.
So it was 1949
Okay, okay.
that they sent them to Laos. They went to Vientiane, the capital city,
okay.
and learning the language. So
No, this is the Laos language. The
Lao language, yeah. They'd already learned the French. Now
Okay.
they were learning the Lao
Okay, so-
language.
Wow, wow. So your dad knew basically Russian, English, French, and
Well, he
Lao.
was learning. He was
Right.
learning Lao at the time.
Okay, so that
so
was-
they had been in Vientiane just 2, 3 months, 4 months.
Sure.
And the mission said they had a missionary presence in northern Laos in a place called Siêng Khoang province,
right, right.
and which happened to be very mountainous. It happened to be a lot of Hmong lived there.
Sure, sure.
And they had a missionary presence for about a year before World War II,
Right, right, right.
with no results.
Right, right, right.
And so they said, we want to reopen that field.
Okay, okay.
And there were several missionary families there already, and they asked all of them if they would go to Siêng Khoang.
So this is Laos now.
This is Siêng Khoang in Laos. And none of them felt called to go there.
okay.
And so they got to the bottom of the barrel,
Right,
the,
right.
the very newest
Right,
people there.
right, right,
And
right.
my father very innocently said, I can learn Lao just as well in Siêng Khoang as I can in Vientiane. So we're willing to go. If you
Okay,
need somebody
okay.
there, we're willing to go.
Okay. So did he waited how long? He waited in 1947 before he decided to go to Sinquan.
No, it was in 1949, right at,
Right, 40
like within 2 or 3 months after
Okay.
they got to Laos.
So he just decided that since
He
could
didn't. He
learn-
didn't decide. He says, "Yes, I'm willing to
Okay,
go."
okay, okay.
It wasn't. It wasn't a
Awesome.
choice. He said,
Right, right.
and he said, "Yes, I can learn Lao there."
Okay.
So one problem is, when they got to Siêng Khoang, his premise was wrong.
Okay, okay.
Because he said, "Yes, I can learn Lao just as easily in Siêng Khoang as I can in Vientiane."
Right, right,
2 weeks after he arrived in Siêng Khoang,
right.
their language teacher says, "This is too remote. I cannot be
Right,
here."
right.
And she went back to Vientiane.
Okay,
So they had no language
Oh,
teacher.
wow, okay. So
And it was, they struggled to find somebody to help them learn the language.
Wow. So let me recap
Okay,
this now.
please, go ahead.
So Dad takes you guys to Saigon, and he learns the French language. And during that time, learning the language, he was finished and settled with that. but because of some of the unsuccessful attempts of reaching people in Laos, and especially in Sen Quan, your father, the access opened up for your father to come to Vientiane, which he could come and study the Lao language, assuming that that could be a starting place. But since the unsuccessful attempt in Sen Quan province, your dad figured out that maybe since he's learning Lao, he could learn it anywhere because it's still Laos. So he goes to Laos, right? I mean, goes to Sen Quan, and the teacher was up there, but yet it was too remote, and all suddenly the teacher of Laos language decides to just abandon them or leave.
Yes.
So your father is literally kind of like stuck up there now.
We're stuck up there,
okay?
yes.
And without the Laos language, right?
Yes.
And he's very new there now simply because he just trusted God that that's where God wanted, and he goes and all suddenly things didn't look the way that it should.
Things did not work out like they.
And that's the thing that I like, because we tend to see this supernatural thing being done. You have this kind of divine appointment that we're not even aware of, right? And then, but he was just willing, and I think that heart of being willing captured what God's plan was.
All along the way, it was willing,
Right.
willing to change from Africa to French Indochina,
Right.
willing to go to Laos,
Right.
willing to go to Siêng Khoang,
Right.
and let me tell you, after their language teacher left,
Okay.
and they were abandoned in Siêng Khoang,
Right.
it did not feel to them like a divine appointment.
Right.
It felt like it did not feel very comfortable to them.
Sure. And I'm thinking right now that your father, his first passion, or at least his first desire, was of a total different continent with a total different group of people, and in God's divine plan and His sovereignty over what He chooses at the right time of, His creation to all peoples of earth. It is the really truly the Matthew 24:14, which is just go to all ends of the earth, regardless of where it is. So your dad took on that task, pretty much.
And at that time, they were the youngest, the newest missionaries in the
Right.
Lao field.
And so it's almost, you're like the leftover that
Exactly.
you're going to do it, right?
Exactly.
Well, that is amazing. I mean, I without the details, I can't imagine. It's almost like maybe possibly Ted wanted to go to like a unseen tribe or whatever, or an unseen group of people, but your father did not even know nothing of.
He knew nothing about that, absolutely nothing.
So in the minds of your father during that time, of course, by that time you're maybe 4 or 5 years old. And by that time, of course, later on you're able to articulate the way that your father, his ways of thinking, because your mom's journal and all that stuff. By that time, what was your dad thinking? Is he planning to just witness to the Laotian people, or did he know that there was like a lot of minorities that exist within Laos? Or what was his context of understanding?
What he felt struggling to try to learn the language.
Okay.
His heart, my parents' heart, were we want to share the love of Jesus Christ with the people here. They were not thinking of anything about ethnic groups.
Okay.
We want to learn Lao so we can talk to. They just assumed everybody was Lao at first, so we can talk to the people here and share Christ.
Right.
And so as part of the struggle, they finally wrote to the mission and said, could you please send us someone to help, and because we're struggling with the language,
right.
And we love these people.
Right.
We want to share the love.
So your father has no study or no teaching of Laos to him by this time.
He had like 4 or 5 months.
Okay. So
very minimal.
So it was a minimum way of communicating Laos.
Exactly, and they felt, and the mission response was, well, all of our trained Christian leaders.
Right.
We have employed, we have positioned for them.
Right.
We have nobody to spare. That's what their response was.
Okay, so basically you're not going to get a teacher. That's what they're really saying.
Finally, they said, okay, well, we have this one young couple.
Okay.
They have finished 1 year of Bible school.
Okay.
And we can send them to help you.
Okay. And this couple is, I'm assuming, Nai King, right?
Nai King.
Okay.
He had gone to Bible school for 1 year in Luang Prabang.
Okay.
He's ethnically Khmu.
Khmu.
And so that when he came, that it started to open my father's eyes to, By then they were starting to see that there were some different ethnic groups.
So your father begins to realize that, wait a minute, Laotian, that means the people of Laos, it's not just Laos people as if they're one race.
Right.
This is a lot of different ethnics,
exactly,
even distinct from the language of Laos.
Exactly.
Right? And I'm assuming that Nai King spoke his Khmu language.
He spoke Khmu. He spoke most of the Khmu spoke at that time. They spoke much better Lao than the Hmong did. And the reason is the Khmu at that time were Ka in Lao means slave. And so that's the modifier to their name. So Khmu, they were the slaves of the Lao. And because of their slaves, they would know Lao.
Oh, yes.
Yes, they kept their own language, but Khmu, many more Khmu spoke and understood Lao.
So that bridge, I guess, in the way of saying that our expectation of teacher didn't come by an actual teacher. It came by another ethnic who just by chance did a one-year Bible program, and he knew enough, or he knew the Lao language well enough to say, let's just use this young guy.
He could study, he could read and write.
So by this time, I would assume that Nai King was a young, married couple,
very young
guy, married too, and I'm assuming that, and so when that took place, what was your father's reaction? Because I know that he was probably thinking, like, come on, give me a teacher while I'm getting a Bible student? I mean...
No, actually, my father was one of these kind of... He always praised God and was gracious. And so
that's good.
He was so appreciative of the mission. Yeah, so this guy only has 1 year Bible school. But he so much appreciated that he has someone to work with him, a colleague.
So there was pretty much this grace aspect of your father, knowing that, praise God, whatever or whoever you send, I'm willing. Let's go ahead and learn the language and let's move forward.
And that was his opinion. And again, a lot of his assumptions were not what we would think of the right assumptions. So he just assumed that this Nai King was well versed in the scriptures. And he got that corrected sometime later when he heard Nai King tell the story of how Moses took the children of Israel across the Red Sea in an ark. Mixed up all the Bible stories.
No, that's totally understandable. How long was Nai King a Christian during this time?
That's a good question. Probably for his village, probably was a Christian village. So
he had a background of being brought up as a Christian.
Yes.
So it was easier for
I want to. This is another background information. The very first believers in Laos were Khmu.
Oh, wow.
And it was called, at the time, it was called Luang Prabang province. But today it's in Udomsai province in northern Laos. And that was in the first Khmu village to believe was in 1898.
So the first Christianity, or basically the first believer to Christianity or Protestant Christian, today we just call it born-again believers.
Yes.
Was in 1898, and they weren't even Laotian.
They were not.
They were Laotian by nationals, but they're Khmu people.
Right, exactly.
Wow,
so
that is amazing.
And that this is a totally different story, but that expanded because there were Thai missionaries from Thailand that served the Khmu churches in northern Laos. But that's a side story.
Well, I mean, that is like, even I'm shocked. Like, I didn't know that. I just felt that maybe Nai King, I know of his story, but I just figured that maybe he was a newly converted, went to school, and somehow went along with your father. But I didn't know about the learning the language barrier and all that stuff. And so by this time, I would assume that of course, they dress different from the Hmong people. We know that for sure.
Well, the Khmu would have adopted the Lao style of dress, Western dress.
So they're very, I guess, Lao citizen, or nationals of Laos. So we know that definitely they have already adapted to how Laotian government, Laotian country, and all the likes were. What about the Hmong people? I mean, of course, you guys never heard of them at all, right? So there was probably by this time your dad being with Nai King, learning the language, there was probably at this time no mentioning of the Hmong because your dad was learning the language.
But even before Nanking came, of course they encountered the Hmong.
Okay.
Because they would go to the market.
Okay.
And the Hmong would come down in their clothing.
All right.
And
very distinct.
Buy and sell in the market. And of course, by then they had encountered Hmong because that was kind of the center for the Hmong population for all of Laos.
This is Xieng Kwan.
This is Xieng Kwan, yes.
And so your dad has probably, he's seen them,
yes,
was aware of who they were, but
he couldn't communicate with them.
There was no communication. There was really just no information other than this is just a tribal group of people who lives in Laos, and he's learning the Laos language with Khmu guy.
And a couple of other things before Nanking came. Of course, my father connected with the French because he could speak French.
Absolutely.
And he was introduced to the governor of the province.
Okay.
And the governor of the province asked my dad to teach him English.
Yes, sir. Yes.
And my dad said, well, if you will teach me Lao.
Okay.
That didn't really work.
Right.
Because the governor was a busy guy.
Right.
So he couldn't teach and he couldn't study.
Oh,
but they developed a relationship.
Okay.
And part of that relationship, this is even before Nanking came,
okay,
is that the governor introduced my father to the vice governor of the province.
Okay.
The vice governor of the province was, he always wore Western dress, well educated by the French, and his name was Banya Tubi Li Fong.
Oh, wow.
And he was introduced to this very high-ranking Hmong person.
Right.
That was even before Nanking came.
Right. Did he knew that Tubi Li Fong was a Hmong?
Yes, he did.
Okay.
Yes.
So he was well aware.
He could speak Tubi in French because Tubi Li Fong had studied in French, so they could communicate with each other.
And of course, you know, and we all know, and of course, the Hmong people is very well aware that Tubi Li Fong is a very prominent figure in Hmong history, and so your father actually knows Tubi Li Fong
very well.
Oh, wow. And so,
so I'll just add a footnote to him. I knew him.
Oh, wow. That's even more of a double wow.
But one little story.
Right.
When I came back to the States for college,
okay.
I went to college in Nyack, New York.
Okay.
Nyack College.
Okay.
And my first semester there, I heard my father wrote and said that Tubi Li Fong was in Washington and he was coming to New York.
Okay.
So I contacted Lynn Barney, who worked with the Hmong.
Right.
And I said, I would like to talk to Banya Tubi Li Fong.
Right.
And so he says, yeah, well, I'll try to work it out. And so they contacted the people that were taking care of Tubi.
Right.
Was the CIA.
Okay.
And they say, we cannot allow a college student to meet with him.
Yes.
And so there was a lot of back and forth. And finally, they got the word to me from Lynn Barney, is he's going to arrive at the train station at this time, and I could go with Lynn Barney to meet him.
Okay.
So he got off the train, we met, we went and had dinner together.
So there was still this relationship that Tubi also.
And he just gave me a big bear hug.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
That's see.
Anyhow, that's a PS.
Right, and even till this day, I mean, not even to the Hmong Christians that knows about that, but even in a broad sense of just the Hmong people in American or Hmong Americans, I mean, they see Tubi as a very important person, but at the same time, knowing now that Tubi was also really responding to a kind of like a nice relationship, a friendship between you and your father, despite you guys being Christian and Tubi being in the practices of Hmong people. And so that's really something to where none of us,
so my father already knew Tubi. So to continue the story.
Right.
So when Nanking arrived in Xieng Kwan, my father and Nanking, they looked for a place for him. It took them several days to find a place. And they finally found this little cottage. And the rent was really cheap.
Right.
So they rented it. And as Nanking was moving in, the neighbors said, you will not live here long.
Okay. And now, this is the village that the story now unfolds. This is the story that I know, okay? And so the story that I know now is that it was a place to where he didn't just moved by to and just slept as like a hotel or a hostel place. It was actually a place that you guys rented it from.
Rented.
Okay.
And the owner of the landlord, the owner, was the personal shaman for Panyatubi Lipong.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so the neighbors said, this house is haunted. Evil spirits live here. You cannot live here very long.
Okay.
And the first 2 nights they were there, there was loud screaming and yelling, and it was very disruptive. And they
now, how old were you this time?
I was 5 years old.
5 years old. And you could still remember vividly how you experienced pretty much...
Well, did I experience it? I don't know. My parents, you know, I was... Some of this story I was part of.
Okay.
But
can you recall as a small child that you guys first enter a house?
We didn't live there.
Okay.
This was the house for Nai King and his wife.
So this is Nai King and his wife.
Yes, and his wife. And they just prayed. And so after a week, they had this spiritual attack the first 2 nights.
Okay.
And then after that, because of their prayers, it stopped.
Okay.
And then a week later, his name is Buya. Was the shaman.
Yes.
And he said to Nai King, I want to know, you have something that's much more powerful than these spirits.
Yes.
I want to know about this.
Yes.
So Nai King went up to, it's a little ways, they had to go through town and up a hill to my parents' house.
So your parents was in a different house. This was Nai King's place where he rented it.
Right.
And supposedly it's the haunted house.
Right.
Okay. So your father didn't stay there, of course, but we definitely do know now that because it was haunted, a lot of people didn't stay there long, or they were just totally
Nobody would
scared.
stay there.
Okay.
Nobody would stay
so
there.
So Nai King just decided to take up the challenge simply because he was a Bible student.
And he felt that God would protect him.
And obviously God protected him, and there wasn't nothing to be worried about. And Buya finally asked Nai King, something is going on.
I want to know about this power.
Right. Okay.
So my
Nai King goes to your father.
My parents are studying Lao language.
So
they're in their process of learning the language, and Nai King interrupts them and says that Buya wants to talk. Can you go and talk to Buya with me?
Okay.
So they go down there to Buya's house, and my father tells the story from creation through the birth, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus.
Yes.
And in the end, Buya says, what can I do to have access to this power?
Wow.
And so my father explained the plan of salvation. He said, I want this. They prayed, but then before they prayed, Buya said, do you think God would understand if I prayed in Hmong language?
Right.
And my father said, yes. And my father, at that time, was not comfortable enough in Lao to pray in Lao.
Okay.
So my father prayed in English.
Okay.
Nai King prayed in Lao.
Okay.
And Buya prayed in Hmong.
Okay.
And then they gathered all the spirit paraphernalia, spirit things, spirit worship things, and had a big bonfire and destroyed that.
Right.
So then the next part is, the timing was 2 days later, our family went to Vietnam for the annual conference of Christian Missionary Alliance missionaries, Indochina, from all the countries of Indochina. They gather.
So that was 2 days later.
2 days later. And you have to imagine, my parents were on cloud 9. They were thrilled. They were excited.
Right.
This is the first conversion in Siêng Quang province.
Right. And
this is the first family of Hmong to come to Christ.
Right, and they're not even Laos speaking.
No. Right. So they just praising God at this conference.
So your dad was excited, super overwhelmed by God's joy and love, and I would have probably imagined that there wasn't any kind of connected relationship that your father had with the Hmong people yet, other than knowing that Nai King just stayed at their house, their haunted house, and by seeing God's power being demonstrated just because Nai King was willing to stay there and your dad made effort to just move up there, it was almost like something divine happened. And none of them expected it also. So God was really at work. So he leaves, and I want to, I guess the stories I hear is that, okay, he leaves, And so what happens after that now? Because
So-
they're newly converted.
Right.
Okay.
So my parents are there in Dalat, Vietnam for a month.
Okay.
Then they go back to Vientiane
Okay.
and capital city of Laos.
Yes.
And they fly back to Siêng Khoang.
Okay.
But it was the rainy season.
Okay.
So they had to wait for clear skies.
Oh, yes, yes.
So they were in Vientiane for another month.
Okay. Okay.
So they're gone for 2 months.
Okay.
When they come back, Nai King and Buya come and see my father.
Right.
And they have a notebook.
Right.
And in the notebook are 1,000 names of 1,000 people that have come to faith in Jesus Christ.
Without your dad around.
No missionary there.
Right.
No missionary.
Right. And so basically a mass conversion of 1,000 people just somehow, by God's divine grace, right?
Absolutely.
Just came into the faith. Your dad wasn't even involved because he had to go to the council or at least a conference. And he comes back but was delayed. And so I think in your dad's mind by this time, I would imagine that your father was probably thinking, I'm so super excited to get back to
Yes,
Singapore.
yeah.
And oh my goodness, it's almost like a spiritual war that was against your dad.
Right, exactly,
And so your
exactly.
dad was probably kind of like
He's
frustrated.
concerned
but in a sense,
about
right,
this
very
new
concerned,
convert
right.
and Nai
And
King
so-
caring for him. That's
Yes.
what he was concerned
And I'm
about.
thinking like, wow, God, you can't let this go away, get away from you. This is the first. And he's excited. I get that. And so when he showed it to Nai King, and Nai King and basically when he showed to Insight Singkon, Nai King and Boya, when they came to your father, what do you think was going in your father's mind by this time?
Well, he was just thrilled to see them.
Okay.
And he was more than thrilled when he saw what they had to show him.
Right,
He
right.
just could not believe it.
Okay.
And he was just praising God.
Right.
He sent a telegram to the mission immediately.
Right.
He said, and the mission, of course, didn't believe it.
Okay.
Because these things don't happen.
Yes, I mean, obviously, it's almost like unbelievable
Exactly.
in a sense to say, wait a minute, something happened without me? Come on.
Yeah.
I had to do something
Right.
for it. I'm looking at it from a probably in the lens of seeing that by this time, Boya converted, but I would probably assume by this time that his relationship or the vibe or the glow in him was totally, absolutely different. He probably didn't see your father as a Westerner coming to their country. Would you probably see it more in the sense that the Spirit was leading him to himself? There was joy of seeing your father as a brother now, and there's this brotherhood.
Absolutely.
And so,
absolutely.
okay.
And so the other connection is my father already had a personal relationship with Panya Tubi Lifong.
Okay.
And so he talked to Tubi.
Right. Okay.
And so Panya Tubi Lifong made a proclamation. He said to the Hmong people,
Right.
these people are welcome to visit, and this is something that has come to our people.
Right.
Listen to them. You make your decision.
Oh,
I
wow.
will not tell you, but you make your decision.
So basically, there was now a free access.
He was not at all opposed to this movement.
Wow, and that's really the Spirit's heart's moving. It always reminds me of the story of Nebuchadnezzar at one point, or Cyrus at one point, when you allow things to happen just for God's glory, even despite of. And I tend to look at God's sovereignty in the balance of man's responsibility, just as long as man was faithful, or at least they were obedient to the calling of God. His sovereignty always triumphs, and people or supernatural divine grace just happens, right? And by this time, now your father's back 2 months now. I'm assuming that this is still 1949 to 1950.
Yeah. No, this is 1950.
Okay.
This is
so
1950.
1950.
This would be probably August, September 1950.
Okay. So this is 1950. So it's actually an accurate number of 1950 when the Hmong people came to Christ, right?
Right.
And so 1950. So of course, Hmong people is still really new to the faith today, because it's only 2018. So that's 68 years. And so I'm hoping we do a 75-year celebration.
Yeah.
But
invite me.
Yeah, we will. We will see you there. So this happens, and so of course there was great joy in your father. I definitely know, because I know how it is that once you've been diligent to God, and the Lord has led you to really bring a gospel message to almost a tribe or a group of people that is totally alienated from the gospel message, or even don't know nothing of it at all, right? By this time, I mean, to your dad's joy, how excited was it when you go back and look into your mom's journal and your mom's description?
Just incredible. I want to follow up a little bit, as to what happened after that.
Sure.
So, after my father came back, kind of, I can't tell you exactly the time frame, but fairly quickly after he came back, Panyatubi Lifong invited my father to his home and asked him to tell him this story.
Right.
So he told him the gospel story again, from creation through the life of Christ and resurrection of Christ. And Panyatubi said, I am a Lao government official. I'm an official in the Lao government.
Right.
I cannot become a Christian officially because Laos is a Buddhist country.
Right.
And so, but he says, I do not prevent my wives from becoming Christian.
Okay.
At that time, both of his wives became Christians.
Oh, wow.
He had all of the spirit things in his house destroyed.
Oh, wow.
Panyatubi Lifong had all of the spirit things in his house destroyed.
Okay. Wow, that is only by the grace of God. And this is a prominent figure in the Hmong people.
Yes, so some of the very earliest believers were his wives and children.
Oh, wow.
And then so later, periodically, village chiefs and stuff would come to Panyatubi's house, and very often he would invite my father to come and share the good news with these.
Oh, wow. The story gets even better when you share like that. Yes,
unbelievable?
That is unbelievable. I mean, it makes me really just, drenched into the wonderful love of why God so loved the Hmong people that he can use Adrianoff at the right time, Ted at the right time, and contribute not just into being there in Sengkwan, but with, just an unknown guy by the name of Nanking, and using that almost like a Paul and a Silas, or a Barnabas and a Paul. You have that kind of connection, and in fact, all of them weren't even of Laos nationals. They were basically minorities in Laos with different languages. It is very overwhelming to just even hear that the Hmong people were really, really receptive into the gospel, even having such high prestige as how Panyatubi Lifong allowing not just his wife but his families to come into the faith. During that time, I know that conversion was new. We know that there was a lot of excitement. We know that there was a lot of changed life, because obviously hearing just story of Yamboya or Boya to your father, you see this brotherhood. And your dad sees them as brand new spiritual children to him, and he feels the need to continue to disciple, love them, and just continue to educate them in the Christian faith or the faith. During this time, do you recall, or do you still can you see it that there was resistance during the time, or do you see that God was moving so well that resistance wasn't even a problem?
Early on, there was not a lot of resistance.
Okay.
A little bit later, there was some.
Okay.
And most of the resistance was from within the Hmong. There was some cults that came up.
Okay.
And but this, I think that the faith was pretty strong.
Okay. So the faith continues to grow. When do you think, or when do you recall your dad's ministry with the Hmong people? When do you recall the moment that it became a climax to the Hmong people, to where they're right on the gospel, despite knowing the theological depths of Bible or whatever, but just the transformational change? When do you recall that there was the high point of the Hmong people?
Well, by the time, several things. It was 2 years later that our family went back to the States for furlough. They'd been there for, they'd been there for 5 years.
Okay.
And so they went back to the States.
So 2 years
after that.
Vietnam. And then 3 years in Laos.
Laos, right.
So there was 5 years, and then they go back to furlough.
At that time, there were 5,000 believers in Siêng Khoang province.
So all suddenly,
not just Hmong,
right.
Hmong and Khmu.
Okay, so Khmu was converting
Right,
too.
yes.
Okay.
What you asked the theological thing, within a year
Okay.
after the first conversion in 1950
Right.
of the Hmong,
Right.
my father felt the importance
Okay.
of training these
Yes,
in the scriptures.
Right.
So he started a Bible school there.
Oh, wow.
And then after a year
Okay.
of the Bible school in Siêng Khoang,
Right.
the mission said, well, most of the believers in this whole country are in Siêng Khoang.
Right.
So they moved the Bible school,
Okay.
the official CMA Bible school, from Luang Prabang to Siêng Khoang.
Okay, wow. So, and I'm thinking that probably most of the believers was in Siêng Khoang, and most of the believers was probably Hmong.
Most
by
of them
then.
were Hmong, yes.
And so this is probably using the Laotian language.
It was
like
using
you
the
said.
Lao language.
And so your father started a Bible school, and so I'm assuming that majority of the students were really Hmong people. By the
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
Do you still recall who they were? Like maybe
I would
couple
know them.
guys?
Yes,
okay,
yes.
So you
yeah.
still
yes,
remember them?
yes,
Wow.
Yes.
And so
yes.
by this time,
I knew them.
how excited were these students when they were studying underneath your father?
Some of them, it was hard.
Okay.
Because they studied in the Lao language.
Yes,
The
yes,
Bible
absolutely.
school was in the Lao
Right.
language. And I think his name was Seng Pao Tao.
Okay.
He came, he knew very little Lao
Okay.
language, and he had to have lots of help.
Okay.
And he was struggling, but he made it through.
Okay.
And eventually became the president
Right.
of the church in Laos.
Right. The Hmong people knows him as
Yeah.
Ajahn Seng Pa.
Yeah.
So basically, yes. I mean, we're really looking at the story unfold within the Hmong people coming to Christianity simply because the first leader ended up becoming the president of the Hmong Christians, but at the same time, he was a person that wasn't really, I guess, academic based. I mean,
He didn't know enough Lao.
not
It was-
language based,
yeah.
right? And so even God could use pretty much the most struggling learner of the Lao language to actually become a prominent figure and leader within the Hmong believers too.
My father felt that education in the Bible was
Right.
very important.
Absolutely.
The other thing that he felt very strongly, the reason why he wanted to train them in the Bible was so that they could read from the Bible themselves rather than having a missionary tell them how they were supposed to behave. They would come to class and ask questions, and he would say, "What does the Bible say?" Rather than tell them how to behave and how to act.
So after 5 years, you come back for 1 year furlough, or your father, and then you return, and that's going to probably be the 7th year that Hmong people has, or basically 3 years after Hmong converted, your dad went down furlough. He came back, and it'll be probably the 5th year that Hmong people converted,
or more.
a
So
little
they
over
came back in 1954, 55.
So, and by that time, your Siêng Khoang has become the biggest area where the conversion took place among.
The problem is in 1954, the Viet Minh, the communist Viet Minh from Vietnam, had overrun Siêng Khoang.
Okay. Wow. So there was resistance in the sense of military.
Yes.
Of course, we know that spiritual always takes place, and there was family oppositions. Did your father ever felt once that he was unsafe, or he just trusted the Lord? And how
my father very often said, the safest, this is what he said, the safest place in the world is in God's will.
Oh, wow. That is powerful.
So he
I
never
got the
felt
chills just hearing that.
he never felt unsafe.
Oh man, yes. I mean, it's just an honor just to even hear you said it, and it sounds like your dad just said it, and so I'm thrilled. I mean, of course, my background is of my father converting, and then of course he ended up converting, and knowing the Alliance background, he went into the Alliance, and then he became an Alliance pastor too. And so I grew up without this Alliance background of the Hmong people until I really became a pastor, and I sat on it to kind of really look at the historical richness of how Hmong people became Christians. And of course, Ted Adrianoff's name is very well known, and because everybody doesn't pronounce it as Adrianoff, they just say Adrianoff.
Or Alinar or something.
So, but that really just touched my heart, just to know how your father knew that it was of the will of God, that he was a vessel or an instrument that God can use for the Hmong people. By this time, your father's ministering to the Hmong people, and I don't have to just say it because I know that it's there, but I just want to know it from your own experience, and having you express it maybe even be more profound. But how much does your dad love the Hmong people?
Are you kidding?
Right. How much do you?
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's. All of a sudden, that was his world. That was his heart.
Right.
That was.
No, I'm about to cry.
No, that was.
Right.
I can't express how much.
Okay.
It was just extreme.
How did I know that now you see your dad loving the Hmong people just the way he loves you guys. So
exactly.
I know did that attach you to the Hmong people?
Absolutely.
By this time?
So I guess his name is now. There's a pastor here, older pastor here.
Right.
His name is Bao Li.
Yeah.
And he reminds me that as little children.
Right.
We would be ornery together. He was my friend.
Right.
We would be ornery together in church. My friends when I was growing up were Hmong.
Oh, yes.
So of course that's just part of the family.
Right. Did your father ever study the Hmong language after?
He did not formally study it.
Okay.
He learned to speak some Hmong, and that was one regret that he expressed. That he never learned, formally studied the Hmong language. He could communicate, but not very fluently.
So he knew enough Laos just to communicate the Laos language by this time.
He was very, very fluent in Lao.
So what happened with Nai King during this time? With Nai King...
He went back to Bible school.
So he went back, and now your dad is went back in St. Kun, stuck with the Hmong people, educating them in the Laos language. And I'm imagining by this time, the Bible was in Laos, so it was a lot easier to teach it. And of course,
but it wasn't in Hmong.
Okay.
So also, right before my parents went on furlough this first time, Linwood Barney and his wife arrived in Siêng Khoang. They were assigned to help develop and translate the Bible into the Hmong language. Right. So they were specifically assigned to the Hmong people. They learned the Hmong language, and they worked on translating the Bible into the Hmong language. Right. They were with this Christian Missionary Alliance.
Yeah, I heard of the Barneys too. I just never met them. I'm just too young to, I guess, before Mrs. Barney went with the Lord. I think that was... No,
she's still...
Mr. Barney.
He did, yes.
So, correct. So Mr. Barney with the Lord. I never got a chance to know because maybe I'm a young guy. So by this time, the Barneys came. They were assigned to the Hmong people specifically for Bible translation. They had to learn the language. By this time, I know that you know the Barneys really well. Did they share anything to you in terms of the difficulty of the Hmong language, or they just took it with great joy to say, you know what, we're going to take up this challenge?
I cannot express how they felt about the difficulty of the Hmong language. I will say that Lynn Barney is a linguist, and so his way of thinking is learning the language. So.
No. He did.
Some people, it's really hard. Right. But some people, this is their life.
So Mr. Barney goes on, or Reverend Barney, he goes on. He learns the language, and now he's working the new Bible or a Bible translation for the Hmong people.
And they were only on the field for one term.
Okay.
4 or 5 years.
And that was specifically Bible.
Right.
And so, by this time, I was told that they were using the Laos character, translating it
initially. Yes.
So that was exactly. So I'm actually accurate enough in that picture.
Yes.
And so by this time,
they were using both, because there was a French. Father Sabina, I think his name is, that started. So they were doing both.
Okay. So the French Catholic father basically he translated, or basically he created.
They collaborated.
Right. Okay.
Yes.
So this is the same one from French Guiana, right? Is it this father?
I'm sure.
And he helped create a.
Well, I mean, the one that created the script has passed away long
Right.
ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so the Barneys was there. They translated it. Your father was still there, working among the Hmong people. And so you grew up with all the Hmong kids. They are pretty much your brothers, and that's how you guys did it. How was your sibling, and of course you were the oldest brother and the oldest sibling. How was your siblings towards the Hmong people too? Did they take it with great excitement and joy with you to be over there in Laos?
Well, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
But the other thing you have to understand, when we grew up,
Okay.
we went to school in Vietnam.
Okay.
We did not go to school in Laos.
Okay.
So we would spend 2 months in Laos.
Okay. So it was a boarding school that you were sent off. Okay.
2 months or 2.5 months, November, December, and early January, and then 2 months in the summer.
Okay.
So we were only
Right.
about 4 months a year we were in Laos.
Okay.
And what happened was, we were in Siêng Khoang at the early time. What happened for me for the Lao language was I had 4 months of the year to practice Lao.
Okay.
I had 8 months of the year to forget everything I knew about Lao.
Okay.
And so I kept, it was a cycle.
Right. So it was pretty much the international school that you were at.
It was a
English
mission school.
Yeah, mission school. So, and yes, I forgot that's what usually happens if you go to the mission field anyways. So by this time, when you came back in summertime for your parents, then that would be your friends. That would be who you grew up with. And so how long did the Lord use your father in Laos before your father finally his time came up to where he had to come back to America and settle? How many years?
My father served there there was a lot of political and warfare going on, so they could not be in Siêng Khoang. He finally left in 1960 from Siêng Khoang.
Okay.
He stayed involved in Laos with the Hmong and with the mission. He became the chairman of the mission.
Okay.
And in 1968, he was having headaches. He was struggling.
Okay.
The August, I guess it was 1968. He went to Bangkok to the hospital, and they diagnosed a brain tumor.
Okay.
And they told him he had to come back to the States for an operation. He went back to New York for an operation on his brain tumor. It was cancerous, and that was, I think it was September, October 1968, and he passed away in February 1969.
Oh, wow.
He was 49 years old when he passed away.
So he stayed long enough. Of course, health, the only thing that had to defeat him was his health. Nothing else was stopping him. He came back to America, and I'm assuming that it probably broke his heart to just come back to America, but he had to get that treated because it's required. Of course, all of our bosses, that is part of the lines back then, had to still take care of their
and he
workers,
he was not well.
Right. So he came back, and that's where God had set his time for him here on planet Earth. And so, do you recall that when the Hmong people by this time heard about your father going back and him going on to be with the Lord, how devastated was it for the Hmong people that you know about?
It was extremely devastating because he was.
Right.
Hey, listen, I can say that he was the hero.
Right.
My experience here this last few days, he is the hero.
Yes,
it's not a past tense.
Right.
It's
right. And there's this present tense. There's going to be this future.
Yeah.
I think you will never lose that because there's history within. It's a forever written script that God used a wonderful person to carry out a work that only God can do.
Yes, that's
and
right.
I know that despite of the sinful, innate being of who we are, by God's wonderful grace and by God's wonderful timing and in God's wonderful creation, that He picked such a perfect time to use a missionary that didn't have a clue that that was what's going to happen, to which now, today, I mean, you know of the Hmong people of just, you know, Southeast Asia and the conversion that took place. And so because those are all byproducts, or we are all small little means of how your dad was that instrument that God just decided to say, hey, Ted, because you went, I'm going to do something great. And maybe even if you don't ever get to see it, it's going to be rewarded, and you're going to see it from heaven smiling down.
I just want to kind of my father's character and how it was throughout his life. He never put himself forward. Okay. So he and my mother felt called to Africa. Okay. The mission said, would you be interested in going to French Indochina? Right. And they said, where is that? And if that's the will of the mission, we will submit to the mission. Right. And so they went to French Indochina.
So your father, I mean, obviously he didn't even know what French Indonesia was.
No. And the same thing with Laos. He said, if you want to sign me to Laos, we'll go to Laos. Okay. And the same thing with Seong Huang. Everything. So, his life was characterized by submission.
Right. Wow. I mean, that really speaks of God's...
I wish I could do that.
Yeah. So by this time, when your father came back to America, of course, the family came back. And this is somewhere in 68, 69 now. And so by this time, you were back. I would assume that you guys were back into your hometown.
No, we settled because my father was in the hospital in New York City. Then the CMA had housing in Nyack on the college campus, so they gave us housing.
So you guys was there in the housings up in New York now, and so by this time, what was going on? Not just in the sense of you know, your mom focusing on your father and praying for him and the health and the concern of that. What was your mom's reaction towards everything in terms of, you know, I followed you, we came there also, Hmong people converted, and you're training. Of course, your mom is helping your father. I mean, during this time, I know that your mom was totally in the submission of the Lord too. And so, did your mom take the same joy with your father?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. So she was totally probably thrilled. Just like their spiritual mother, pretty much.
Yeah, absolutely.
And adopting all these Hmong brand new believers and educating them. Did your mom learn French also?
Yes.
Did she learn Laos also?
Yes.
In a sense? Yes. And so by this time they totally love it. I'm assuming that your mom was devastated when they had to be withdrawn out because of the war. And by this time your father had to be, you know, got sick, and so you guys had to do what you guys had to do. What was going on in your mind by this time? I mean, I know despite your father being diagnosed, and of course nobody wants to guess their father's time frame of life, but at the same time, we trust in God's will. We trust in God's faithfulness. Was there any time that your father, or maybe even the way your mom may think, to say, despite us being sick like this, we would never trade it up simply because we just knew that it was
that's how my mother felt. Okay. She said, God has given me the best life I could ever have had.
Wow, that's so good.
Because who gets a privilege like we have had? There is no greater privilege than that.
And especially with a group of people that has never heard of the gospel.
That was,
Right. Now, what was the CMA's response when your father told them, look, there is this new group of tribal people that you guys probably never heard of. They know the gospel now. What was the CMA's response by this time?
That first telegram, they had trouble believing that was true.
Okay.
So they did send up. Okay. It was kind of neat. They sent up the chairman of the field. Okay. And at the time, the mission had an airplane. Right. And the chairman of the field flew the plane up. Right. And he went up there flew there to Seong Huang from Luang Prabang. He had his little briefcase. Right. And just to check things out, he was there for a day. My father took him back to actually, I was there. And took him back to the airport, got in the plane to take Nai King back to Bible school. Right. Okay. That's what he was doing. Okay. And They got in the plane, and it hit a rut and went down and broke the propeller on the plane.
Okay.
And so the chairman of the field was stuck in Seung Kwan for 6 weeks. And at first he was quite upset. He had no clothes, but he and my father were the same size. Could wear my father's clothes. The shoes were not the same size, but he had shoes. And they visited Hmong villages. And this was God's timing. God did this. And so he saw the reality of what happened.
6 weeks of reality.
He just went up for one day to check it out to see for the mission. And he spent there for 6 weeks experiencing the change of the Hmong. Going to villages where villages, when they came there, turned to faith. So this was God's doing.
Was he, did he ended up overjoyed by the fact that he finally firsthand witnessed not just a converted person like Boya, but villages after another?
He had never seen it. This was in 1950, early 51. He had been in Laos since 1929.
Oh wow.
He had never seen anything like that.
So he was overjoyed now.
Yeah, never seen anything like that.
So by this time, you guys are back in the States. You guys are at the fine line after your dad's departure. We definitely know that history is totally really rich within the Hmong people, or the Hmong Christians that came to Christianity. I know that it took a while for the Hmong people, since conversion, of course, 1950 all the way till somewhere in the mid-70s to when they came here to America, and by 1978 they established themselves back with the Alliance because they knew now that they're in America, there's the Alliance, and Ted came from America. And of course, we know the stories of how the Hmong people wanted to be incorporated into the Alliance, but because of language barriers, there was a Hmong missions or Hmong field for the Hmong people. We fast forward this, it's 40 years, we're in Minnesota. Of course, we know that we talk so much about Ted and we want to bring Ted here, but of course, Ted has his timing with the Lord. And so we do whatever's best. We bring his son. We bring somebody who knows about this stuff to enjoy our celebration. And I know that probably if you speak to those who know and those that knew your father firsthand, of course, it's probably going to be unexpressible because there's no way to just express how much they appreciate it and miss your father and all that. But to you, I know it's very impacting for some of us, but I know it's probably more impacting to you because you guys have a direct connection of having the Hmong people becoming your parents as children in the faith during this time. How did you feel when they knew that, okay, 40-year celebration, David, we're going to bring you here to enjoy celebrating with us. How do you feel about this?
So I'll give you a little background.
Right.
Because I grew up with the Hmong, I had a love for the Hmong. And I felt God called, and that's a totally different story, but called me to Laos. I couldn't go there, so I went to Thailand. And God allowed me to work in the refugee camps in Thailand. And I got reconnected with the Hmong. God gave me a love for the Hmong because of my growing up there. And so we working in the refugee camps. We happened to be back in the States in 1978. And I was invited to this strange ranch in California where there was this process of establishing the Hmong district of the Christian Missionary Alliance. I was there for that. And here we are 40 years later celebrating that event of the establishment of the Hmong district of the Christian Missionary. What a privilege to be here.
Yes, well, I mean, I didn't even not know that you were even there. So this is the information that I got just from people because I don't know enough information, I guess. But now I'm even more overjoyed that you're part of that movement. That you were there and now you're here 40 years later. Of course, now I definitely see the joy, the passion behind it, and of course, it's only by the grace of God that. He's used you to impact this generation of the Hmong people. We know that we can say so many things, but if it isn't for God's plan, God's infinite wisdom and His love to the Hmong people, and using your father and then you as his son, being an instrument to encourage and spur on the Hmong people to the Christian faith, of course, it's going to be a never-ending story the way we're going to share it. But we know that your mom loves the Hmong people so much. Your mom has written so well about her journey with your father, and at the same time, by writing it and by just trusting that, this is almost like a memoir of what your mom's been through with the Hmong people as pretty much an adopted mother to the faith. We know definitely that it was never published officially, but your wife has looked at it, and she pretty much penned down an edited version, pretty much.
Exactly.
Into which it's actually a book now, right? Can you share very briefly, basically, why did your wife decide to do that?
My mother tried to have it published,
okay.
And my wife felt this is a story that needed to be published.
Yes.
And we happened to be connected with people that had connections,
okay.
and they liked the story,
okay.
and they said, send it to us.
Okay.
She did not have to look for a publisher.
Okay.
It was provided to her.
Wow.
She was asked to write this.
So God had a plan also that we didn't know also, right? And so your wife went on to edit your mom's memoir, pretty much. And so after she sent it in and they promoted the whole thing, it became a book, right?
It was published in 2001.
Okay.
And it's been republished a number of times.
Okay.
The title of the book is Chosen for a Special Joy.
Chosen for a Special Joy.
By Gene Andrianoff.
Yes, by Gene Andrianoff.
So it's,
yes.
I kind of am prejudiced. I like the book because my mother is the one that kind of put it together.
Right.
My wife wrote it, so I have personal connection to it.
Yes, that's a double whammy blessing.
It is.
And I'm pretty sure there's going to be stories of you in
That's
there.
A problem. Okay. That's a big problem.
In this book, David, I know that it could be purchased through Amazon, yes. Correct? And anybody interested, not just to see God's grace of the working within the Hmong people, and not just a memoir of your mom, but just to see God's hand at work. I mean, this would be something that well worth it to look into. You guys will have a link in this video to find it, in which I encourage every one of you at home who's watching this right now to take consideration to even look it up. I think there is this understanding of it's just a Christian book, or I think it's more than just a Christian book. I think you really begin to see God's love for people in this book. And I think the information that we will provide underneath the screen below will give you guys information about it. David, I know that our time has been very limited. We could talk all night and we could overkill all the batteries in their videos, but we know that Christ is still at work. And Amen. He will continue to do what he has to do. The sense to which when I hear your dad's story, it's Philippians 1:6, to which he who began a great work in your father would not complete it until the day that he so Amen. Ends it. And so your father, I know that is proud, smiling down on all his Hmong children. Amen. and I can expressfully, or not emotionally enough right now, because I do feel very emotional about it, but to say I am that. And even though I never got a chance to talk to your dad or know your dad, I know you. I know I met you last couple of years ago at different conferences, and we have little mini chats, but this time I'm able to sit in with you to know more about the rich history behind it, and not just be stereotyped or be, or at least be told what people says about what they hear, but to hear firsthand your love personally for the Hmong people. And David, it's not really just that your dad that got called, but he completed that work when he called your dad, to which it's when he called Abraham, Isaac was involved. When he called Ted, David was involved. And I know that you fell in love with the Hmong people, kept connected with the Hmong people. And it's not just the Hmong believers that you have the love for, but it's the entire Hmong people of the whole entire planet. Of course, Hmong people didn't know that Westerners could love them too. But because of the love of God, you so much demonstrated Jesus before us. And for that, we are forever grateful for the Adriana families. And I think it will be in the histories until the day that we become God's children in heaven one day. So I would like to just thank you so much, David, for taking this time to really just share those joyous stories that even I wasn't aware of, but now it's shed so much beautiful colors into me being an Alliance pastor, but to the Hmong people, and to know that, look, it's not the Alliance, it's just God loves people, and God loves the people that he created, in which Hmong people is the people that God created. I wanted to end with this. If there is a statement that you do want to just express just to the Hmong people, what would be some words of expression that you want to share to just the Hmong people in the general public?
I guess what I would like to say to the Hmong church in North America is God used a young couple from Russian and Swedish from America to go to Laos and reach the Hmong. Now it's the Hmong turn to go and reach other people with the love of Jesus Christ.
Amen, amen, amen. Thank you, well said. At this time, we know that we don't want to conclude, but we have to. And as we conclude, we thank you for all those who took time to watch this video. I know that this is a Hmong show, or pretty much on Hmong TV network, and many of you just took time to watch it, just to see what God has been doing within the Hmong people. And for many of those who don't know the history of the Hmong people, or the history of how Hmong people came into the Christian faith, I sit here firsthand with somebody who took not just the joy of being called and being picked, or by God's grace. God could have picked anybody, all right, David, but God picked your father and you, and soon to be even your children, to which they probably have some sort of connection with the Hmong people. And I think your children probably has that same feeling that, wait, we have something with the Hmong people too. So I definitely know that God works in his ways. And so I'll end with this. Thank you for watching. And until next time, continue to watch us every week, every Tuesdays from 6 to 7 on Hmong TV channel, which is Hmong Hlu, or I would say Grace. And I am today's host, which is Chan Dang Mo. And until next time, Yong Sha Me Shai to Benu No E Wo Chan Da.